Welcome back to the program. Let's turn our attention now to the government's approach on vehicle emissions standards. Joining me is the Shadow Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Ted O'Brien. He joins us from Sydney, where you've been making the case on this issue. Ted, don't you think a lot of consumers, though, will welcome the government's initiative to have more efficient vehicles on our roads?
Hello, Kieran, and if that was all the government was introducing, I think consumers would be happy. But in truth, what they are introducing is a new big fat tax on the family car and on utes that tradies buy at a time when they can afford it least. And that's the key concern of consumers. And the government is doing this under the guise of an efficiency standard. But a tax is what it is, and a tax is what it has to be called out for being.
When you look at the submission, though, by the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries, they suggested this was in the lead-up to this announcement as part of the government's policy consultations. They suggested, the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industries, that within 5 years that the number of vehicles, electric vehicles and hybrids, would increase dramatically. Doesn't that then provide the wiggle room for manufacturers under the pollution cap to still provide those other more popular vehicles, traditional fuel vehicles?
Kieran, I think the debate about vehicle efficiency standards is one thing, and we as a coalition stood ready to be constructive with that debate. But we made it very clear it's about emissions, price and choice. The government, in the detail they have put forward, fails on all three counts. And now we have the industry itself coming out saying the purchase price of vehicles are going to go through the roof. I mean, mums and dads, the cars they love to drive, they're going to be out of reach. These models might even leave the Australian market. Tradies are going to cop it too, tens of thousands of dollars extra. They'll pass that cost on to households where they do their work. I mean, this is not fair. All Labor has done is they introduced a tax instead of actually having a balanced scheme, and that's the problem.
But just on that point about the Federal Chamber of Automotive Industry suggested that the percentage of new cars being sold, electrics, hybrids, would be basically 4 in 5 cars would be those clean vehicles by the end of the decade. That leaves an enormous amount of room for the industry to sell those other vehicles, more popular vehicles, if they would like, at reasonable prices, doesn't it?
Again, Kieran, it comes down to the detail. The detail that Labor has put out suggests that choice, in fact, will be constrained. I mean, here I am right now. I'm standing at a Toyota dealership in Western Sydney. In fact, in the seat of McMahon, Chris Bowen's seat. If you look at the Land Cruiser, if you can see that behind me, that will go up by $25,000. Now, this is not my estimate. This is what the industry is saying. That vehicle up by $25,000 over the next 5 years as a result of this tax. Now, seriously, we're in the midst of a cost of living crisis. The industry also stood ready to be constructive and work with government, as has the coalition. But instead of putting forward a very sensible, sound approach, the government's gone ballistic on a new tax. I mean, Chris Bowen has come forward with this ridiculous tax, and that's why we're calling it out. It is fundamentally unfair.
Doesn't it bring Australia in line with other comparable nations, other like-minded nations, when it comes to our market economy? You look at the United States, for example, with fuel standards. Isn't it bringing us into line with countries like the US?
Well, indeed, when Labor announced its policy, it said that this brings us in line with the United States. Keep in mind, the United States has been introducing measures for years. Suddenly we're going to have this measure introduced in 5 years. We're up with the US. We found out over the last few days that President Biden himself is pulling the handbrake on their vehicle emission standards because of the impact on consumers. Whereas here in Australia, Chris Bowen has his foot on the accelerator. This is the problem. You know, Labor like to dress things up, package it all up and say, look at the United States, we're going to be like them. Well, in fact, the truth is the US introduced their standards with enormous subsidies that Australians will not get, as well as subsidies for car manufacturers that won't happen in Australia. And even the US are saying it is not working there. This is the problem.
Ted O'Brien joining us from Sydney. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon.